Hello everyone and welcome back to 64 Squares Official. Today we'll take a look at another legendary clash between two of the greatest minds to ever grace the 64 Squares. A fresh Blitz encounter from the 2026 FIDE World Team Championships between the Tiger of Madras Viswanathan Anand and the Mozart of chess Magnus Carlsen. If you think Blitz is a young man's game, Vishy Anand is here to object, at least for the first 28 moves. So let's jump straight into the game. Now e4, c5 and knight to f3 and e6, d4, c takes d4 and knight takes d4 and knight to c6, knight to c3 and queen to c7, bishop to e3 and a6, stopping any bishop to b5 ideas. Now bishop to e2, preparing for castling, and knight to f6, black also developing his pieces. Now kingside castling by Anand. Bishop to e7 and f4 and d6. Now king to h1, a prophylactic move, and Magnus goes for castling on the king side. We have a standard Taimano Sicilian. Magnus opts for a flexible setup while Anand prepares for a kingside expansion. Now queen to e1, bishop to d7, queen to g3 and b5, preparing for b4 ideas. Now a3 stops the b4 and rook a to b8. Carlsen is trying to open the b file. Anand targets the king side with his queen, while Magnus creates counterplay on the queen side. Standard grandmaster territory so far. Now e5 and d takes e5, f takes e5 and knight takes e5. Anand strikes in the center. Magnus accepts the challenge. Vishy has a brilliant tactical justification lined up. Now rook takes f6. A beautiful exchange sacrifice by Anand. He removes the crucial defender of the e5 knight. Now bishop takes f6, bishop to f4, bishop to c6. Instead of bishop to c6, queen to b6 was a better option. Now after queen to b6, b takes e5 and b takes e5. Now queen takes e5 and f6, attacking the queen. Now queen to e4 and e5, attacking the knight. Now knight goes to b3 and king to h8, preventing any queen to d5 ideas. Now bishop to d3, attacking the h7 pawn. Now g6 and a4, trying to open the a file, but instead Magnus played bishop to c6. Now after c6, knight takes c6, queen takes c6 and bishop takes e5 and bishop takes e5. Now queen takes e5. Anand executes the sequence perfectly. White emerges with two minor pieces for a rook and a pawn. A massive strategic advantage. The engine evaluates this as nearly plus 1.5 for white. Now rook f to d8. Black now gets an open file, open rook file. Now bishop to d3, closing the file, and queen to d6. Magnus wants a queen trade. Now Anand goes for queen trade. Queen takes d6 and a rook takes d6. Knight to e4, attacking the rook on e6. Now rook goes to c6. Now b4 and rook to d8. Now knight to c5. Rook to d4, stopping white from any a4 ideas. And king to g1. f5. Now bishop to f1 and rook c to d6. Doubling of rooks. Instead of rook c to d6, e5 was the best suggested move here. After e5, c3. Attacking the rook, and rook goes to d2 and c4, rook b6 and rook to b1 and king to f8, a4, bishop takes c4 and bishop takes c4, a5 and b5. This was the suggested move for black. But instead, Magnus played a rook c to d6 on move 27. Then c3 was played, attacking the rook on d4 and rook to d2. Here a4 by Anand, which is a blunder. The engine suggests a c4 instead. No, if c4 was played, then king to h7, c takes b5 and a takes b5, bishop to b5 and king to e7, a4, rook 2 to d4, attacking the pawn, and a rook to b1, supporting the pawn, and a rook d1 check, rook takes d1 and rook takes a d1 check. This was the suggested move. Instead of that, Anand played a4, which is a blunder. Now after a4, rook to c2, attacking the pawn on c3. Now a takes b5 and a takes b5. Now bishop takes b5 and a rook takes c3. Now bishop to f1 and king to f7. Knight a4 attacking the rook on c3. Now rook goes to b3, attacking the pawn. Now b5 and king to f6. Knight to c5, attacking the rook. Now rook goes to b2 and knight to a4, attacking the rook. Now rook to b4 and knight to c5 again. Now rook to d5, attacking the knight on c5. Knight goes to d3 and rook to b3. Knight to f4, attacking the rook. Now rook to d4 and g3, supporting the knight. Now g5, attacking knight. Now knight goes to e2, attacking the rook. Now rook to d2 and rook to c1. This is seen as an inaccuracy, and g4 was the suggested move here. So instead of rook to c1, if g4 was played, then f4, knight to c1, attacking the rook. Now rook to e3, rook to b1. Anand could have tried promoting the pawn. Now rook to e1, knight to b3, attacking the rook. Now rook takes b1 and knight takes d2 rook, and rook to b4, king to f2 and h6 was suggested moves, but instead Anand played a rook to c1. So after rook to c1, rook takes b5 and knight to c3. Yet another inaccuracy by Anand. Now here also g4 was the suggested move. So instead of knight to c3, if g4 was played, rook to e5 and knight to g3 and f4. Now knight to h1 and rook e3, knight to f2 and h6. Now rook to b1 and rook a2. Bishop to c4, attacking the rook on a2 and rook to a4. This was the suggested line. After Anand played knight to c3 inaccuracy, Magnus replies with rook b to d2. Now knight to d1. Now rook b to c2. Rook takes c2 and rook takes c2. Knight to e3, attacking the rook. Now rook goes to a2 and knight to c4. This is also an inaccuracy by Anand. Bishop to b5 was the suggested move. So let's see, bishop to b5 and h6. Now bishop to c4, attacking the rook. Now rook to a3 and king to f2 and h5. Bishop to e2 and g4 and bishop to f1 and rook to a2 check and king to g1 and king to g5. This was the suggested line, but instead Anand played knight to c4, an inaccuracy, and after knight to c4, Carlsen played e5 and h3. Again, this is an inaccuracy by Anand. Here again, g4 was the suggested move. After g4, the game would have proceeded like g4, e4 and knight to d6, e3, bishop to c4 and rook to c2, bishop to b5, f takes g4, knight e4 check, king to e5, knight g3 and rook to d2. But Anand played h3 instead. So after h3, Magnus plays e4. The central pawns are rolling. The white king is cut off and Anand's clock hits 0, or he chooses to resign in a completely hopeless position. So here Magnus wins. You can never count Magnus Carlsen out, because even when he is completely lost, Magnus does not play the engine. He plays the man across the board. An absolute heartbreak for Anand, but pure magic from the Mozart of chess. If you want to see more historic clashes analyzed, make sure to hit that subscribe button and give this video a like and hit the notification bell. Thank you for the support, and I'll see you in the next one.